thank you for joining us today. Today we're chatting about starting your own business and why businesses fail. So we've got some great panelists, which I'll get to. But looks like we've got a few people on the call today, which is great. And I'm hoping to get some feedback along the way. We've got a couple polls throughout to get your pulse on impressions throughout the session. And we've got the Q&A, so you can submit your questions that way as well. And we also have the chat. So if you feel like the chat is the right channel to put in your questions or comments, you can do that. We certainly encourage you to ask your questions throughout, so we don't necessarily want to do this whole presentation with like questions at the end. The whole idea is that we want to go back and forth, clarify something that you misunderstood or that you want to just make sure you fully understand. And so, yeah, let's go right into it. So today, again, we're exploring why businesses fail and essentially how to avoid it, right? So we're joined by industry experts. So we've got Kayla Isabelle, the CEO of Startup Canada, who's joining us here. We also have Valerie Bruneau, who's a bankruptcy trustee with Gingras. And we have Jessica Wong, who's a director of accounting services at Zenbooks. And so our full bios are with the event page and everything else. And so one of the things that I had noted when we wanted to start up this session was, realistically, if you ask a venture capitalist, they're going to tell you that the founders are almost the most important part, or more important than the business model or the business idea itself, right? And so they'll often put good founders on a new business idea within their portfolio, but they would never put a bad founder with a good idea, right? So I think it's important to think about how important it is to be properly educated and to be a good business owner, and that's going to be more important than the actual idea of what you're working on, right? And so when I was looking it up, one of the studies from Troy State University in Alabama showed that 9 out of 10 business failures are caused by a lack of general business management skills and planning. And then once I started looking into that, I saw that there's an actual separate study that also showed that 9 out of 10 business failures are a result of management inadequacy, which is what they considered inexperience or incompetence. So yeah, I thought that was not a coincidence that 9 out of 10 business failures are caused by basically management inadequacy, right? So you could fix that. This is kind of a good news that you can go do some trainings. You can increase your management skills, your ability, your competence, your experience. These can all be learned, right? And so the single biggest factor that determines success and failure is always going to be within your control. And so that's about investing in yourself. So education, training, experiences, self-improvement. So let's chat about that, and let's chat about the things that are, a little bit broader outside of our control, but that we could still have a glance on and things we can plan for, right? So yeah, maybe let's start off directly with a question. So maybe Valerie, we can go first with you. As a bankruptcy trustee, do you feel like you have some repeat customers? Like, is that kind of like a thing where someone goes through kind of like a bankruptcy and then you see that they constantly are just struggling and not able to keep going with starting their business? Or do people learn kind of their lessons with business, or how does that work?
Well, I would say that the good majority of people will learn their lesson, if I can use that term. Coming to see a trustee and coming to the conclusion that they need to file for bankruptcy, it's not an easy decision, right? It's really difficult. A lot of emotions are involved as well. So we usually see that people will learn and often not repeat. What we do see, and it kind of ties with what you were saying in the intro, is that a lot of people lack just in general business management. And one really easy example is just dealing with their accounting, dealing with the taxes, and just basically financing in a way themselves by the government. So not remitting income taxes, not remitting HST. So we kind of see those repeaters more towards the ones having challenges with those government debts. So that's what I kind of see in my practice.
And Jess, maybe have you seen kind of that happen with like, basically people borrowing against CRA debts? Like, is that kind of like the big trouble, I guess?
I don't see that a lot, but I have seen it happen. And, anytime we see that, it's not really like good news, right? That's kind of a last resort. I mean, there's a lot of issues there, not just the interest rate, but their like kind of attitude towards non-compliance in general. I think it's not really like good long-term for the business.
And actually that's like one of our, when we take on new clients, that's one of our like red flag questions is like, what's your relationship with the CRA? Like, do you have a good relationship? Do you have an adversarial relationship? Do you like to borrow against your CRA debts? Like, kind of like before telling them what they should do, we kind of like, what's your perspective? And then usually if they like to borrow against their CRA debts, we may have to refer them to Valerie at some point. Like it feels like if there's some sort of correlation there of like the people that like to borrow against their HST trust account essentially like tend to go down that route eventually. So that's a good point.
I feel like sometimes it's maybe an easy thing to do in the way that you're not remitting it for a month, for 2 months, for 3 months, and then it kind of snowballs because then the interest, the penalties, and it's easier if you're not able to have a loan from the bank, and it's kind of I'm not saying it's the right way, but it seems like for somebody who's business management skill is not, let's say, up to par. It seems like for them, it's an easy way out.
And you mentioned they, kind of quote unquote, like learned their lesson typically after the first kind of bankruptcy. And so what, like, is there kind of like training that you provide after like a bankruptcy to be like, hey, so that this doesn't happen again, how about you go through our 10-step process so that, like, or I don't know, like, how do they actually improve so that it doesn't happen again? Like,
so I think a lot of the work needs to come from within.
Yeah.
So I mean, I cannot do the work for somebody, right? So I think just getting the interest in your finances and putting just like saying to yourself, it's not an option, right? So putting an appointment with yourself to deal with, and it's either for your business or for your personal budget, just setting some time in your calendar is something definitely that I think everybody should do. Like you do the dishes every day, right? So, but you see it, the finances is not as tangible. So often we don't set the time, but the bankruptcy process does offer 2 kind of follow-up appointments. So they're budget counseling sessions. Okay. So there is a program, a process, formal, but I do think that it's something that needs to be worked on every week, every month. Yeah. So it's a continual battle. Yeah.
And I guess it like basically the bankruptcy process kind of sheds light on all of the things they should have done, and then the importance of them having actually done it and the consequences now of them not having done it, right? Like, so it's a really good, I guess, eye opener that helps people learn. Interesting. Yeah. And so maybe Kayla, I mean, you kind of help businesses through their process, right? Like you help a lot of successful businesses and you see businesses that don't have that success yet, right? And so what do you see as like factors that differentiate those two? Like,
yeah, totally. I think, Eric, all of your points around, choosing the founder and looking for particular types of like entrepreneurial skill sets, things that can be refined and learned, like all of that I see and live and breathe every single day talking to various founders across the country. In addition to everything everyone has shared already, I think competitive analysis. Like we're seeing so many new businesses, startups, traditional, within the tech space, small businesses, so many new and emerging companies coming out of the pandemic. We had 2 million new businesses start up during 2021. But it has been demonstrated, and we've seen a lot of duplication of new innovative ideas, businesses that are not fully understanding the landscape that they are jumping into, and some lack of research in actually really being able to identify what is unique about their offering, if that's cost, if that's some type of segmented industry, if that's the actual leadership behind it. So I think the competitive analysis and really spending a lot of time in the infancy of your business, figuring out what it is that you're offering that's unique. Often if founders overlook that, it brings a whole, additional series of complications afterwards. We're also talking about building blocks of a lot of businesses in the last couple of years that have potentially missed these really foundational elements of starting their business, competitive analysis and the value prop, incorporating, understanding what great digital tools they should be building from the very beginning and leveraging so that their systems are in place, to the accounting and financial management, tracking and building as you mean to go on. Like, it's so hard to be navigating all these different parts of your business, but without that solid foundation, you see this ripple of challenges moving forward. So those are a couple of things that we've seen with founders we've been working with.
Yeah, and I can see how like the experience would have a big factor in that, right? Like if you've already built that, foundation for another business, you already know what it takes, so you can kind of do that again, right? Or if you've been, an entrepreneur or, within a company, then you know more or less what's involved and you can do that for yourself. And yeah, no, those are really interesting points. Valerie and Jess, have you kind of seen the same thing? Like, do you see the kind of similar views as Kayla on that? Like,
like people having more experience, being more successful in their future businesses.
Yeah.
I think we were talking about this earlier, but whenever we have a new business owner that is a client, like we always end up spending more time with them and training them and like basically educating them than with someone that has run a business in the past before, right? Because they already know what to look for. They know that if they're not profitable or not like making money, then they kind of know where to go to look at like, okay, what am I spending too much money on? But whereas a new business owner they don't even know like what to look for or what reports to pull.
Yeah, I feel like for somebody, the learning curve at the beginning is so high, right? So you need to put a lot of energy, a lot of efforts into not only having your own skill, but then learning all the other skills towards running a business. So somebody who already has that, it's definitely it's easier.
Mm-hmm. And maybe, I don't know if Kayla, you have any experience with this, but like, to kind of have a mentor or someone who has gone through it to help you figure out like the importance of like, should you have an HR policy if you only have 2 employees, or like, is that like in theory you're supposed to have it, but practicality, should you concentrate on that or something else? Like, does that kind of help like a lot? Or
Definitely. Yeah, but I think the word mentor even puts a lot of pressure on this sort of dynamic that they're going to, walk you through all of these things that you don't know about, and you're going to rely on them as like this source of truth. I think having like advisory networks and networks that you can tap into for different types of advice at different stages as well. Like you might be looking for a different type of feedback at a different stage of your business, and building these like advisory networks that you can tap into that are trusted, where you can really speak candidly and get solid feedback. I think that's really helpful. But it's advice and it's experience. It doesn't necessarily have to be something that you have to implement into your business. Maybe the banking, all the stuff that we talked about that you should be complying with is important. But when it comes to the direction of your business and the growth of the type of organization that you want to create, some of that has to be a combination of your own judgment and taking those inputs and being able to decide the way forward. So great to have mentors, great to have advisors, and just general networks that you can tap into.
Yeah. I like you're saying like the advisor network, right? Like, because mentor, like you said, is just like such a big daunting thing. Like there's this one person that's going to advise you on how to do everything, but like an advisor network is probably more realistic of like, you have someone who knows a little bit more about HR, or someone who knows a little bit more about, market shares or, whatnot. And yeah, no, that's a good point. And then Jess, for you, like, I mean, you have a pretty intimate knowledge of people's finances, right? Like you're helping out with businesses like week to week, month to month, putting together financial reports. So can you tell us, can you tell when someone's going in the wrong direction? Like, I guess like you're looking at the reports early and you can hopefully kind of pick up some trends, or are there signs or some things that kind of show that they're going in the wrong direction?
Yeah. So, I mean, this might sound obvious, but when they're not making money, right? Like when their expenses are higher than their revenue, then it's like, okay, what is going wrong? Like something needs to change. So profitability is, you know, obviously very important. And then another thing is cash flow, right? Like, which ties into profitability, but I see a lot of business owners, you know, kind of on the brink, and they're like, oh, I don't know if I can make payroll. I don't know if I can pay my vendors. So these are kind of I wouldn't even say they're early signs, right? Like, it's just, yeah, signs that things are not going well or something needs to change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And I think I was telling you earlier, Jess, like about the whole profits and cash flow of like, you know, people sometimes say like, you know, cash flow is like the biggest factor in a company closing down. But the reality is that like first build like a profitable business, right? Like if you have a profitable business, then you concentrate on cash flow. But if you don't have a model where you're set to make a profit, then cash flow is like slightly less important, you know, like, so build a good model and then concentrate on getting your cash early.
Yeah, I feel like for small, go ahead.
I feel like cash flow can also be temporary, but profitability can be long-term. So maybe you have like a cash crunch for a specific reason for a period of time, maybe not so worrisome, but if it's you don't have a business model that's profitable, I think that's when that's definitely a sign.
Yeah, and I think for smaller businesses that, like, you know, we tend to deal with, cash flow and profitability tie pretty closely together. It's just maybe other types of businesses where it's very capital intensive, where it's like less closely tied together, right?
Yeah. And I guess, Valerie, like as part of your work, when someone approaches you and says like they want to consider bankruptcy, you know, you're looking at like, is this a temporary cash flow situation, or is this like a permanent kind of like there's no coming back from this kind of like situation? And I guess that's what you're kind of looking at, right? Like you were saying, like there's kind of the temporary cash flow situation, and then there's like the, you know, long-term situation.
Yes, and I mean, we explore a lot of options. So is it a question that some expenses need to be reviewed? They need to be cut down? Is it a specific niche market that you need to put more energy towards because that's more profitable? Those are the type of things that we could walk through at the, let's say, initial appointment. But over everybody who comes to see me in my office, I would say that the majority, they've already gone through all their possible options. They've cut down what they could. They sat down with the accountant, who is really the person who they trust, right? So ultimately, they want to have those kind of feedback from somebody they trust. And when they're decided that they want to do the bankruptcy, it's because they don't feel like the business is viable anymore.
Right. They've got no more options. And
exactly.
Yeah.
So when you don't have, somebody could even have like an asset that's not being used anymore. Maybe that could be sold and then generate some money to pay the debts off. So those are the type of questions that I would typically go through with somebody, and maybe just have them go through a thought process that sometimes when you're so close to it, it's hard to do on yourself, but having somebody external can walk you through that thought process.
So I guess when people approach you, Valerie, it's not too late. Like, it's not like once they approach you, it's like, all right, well, we're closing down the business. Like, you know, there's kind of like still hope even when they come and approach you. It's kind of like to brainstorm some ideas on like how to avoid bankruptcy and then like go from there. Yeah.
Yes, definitely. And even through a proposal, you can structure some payments. So through the trustee, you can file the proposal, which is going to give you 5 years to repay the debts, depending on the categories and their specifics. But there's a way for your business to get out of the situation if there's still profitability and viability for the future. So if you're carrying a lot of debt from the past, for somewhat reason, maybe I'm just like pandemic comes to mind, right? So there's some government loans, there's some money that was given out, but it needs to be repaid. So maybe you need to have a structured plan to repay that through a proposal. So that's an option that's available through a trustee, not just closing down and doing bankruptcy.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. We just got a question in. This one's for you, Valerie. Have you seen a company bounce back from being close to bankruptcy, or have you advised an owner on a way out?
So I would say somebody who feels like there's some viability. So maybe there's still good sales, the cash flow makes sense. So in that scenario, we could do the proposal and repay the debts on 5 years. So maybe what's bringing the company down right now is that they're not able to service their debt. So in that scenario, yes, there's definitely a way for the owner to get out. I don't know if that specifically was the question, or maybe if you feel like there should be a follow-up, just let me know.
Yeah, it sounds like, you know, there's a way out as long as the current business is profitable, or you can make it profitable. But if it got to the point where it has like all of this debt, is it because it got all this debt at the beginning and then it just can't service the debt even though it's profitable? Or is it just a very, like, there's a bunch of losses every month, and then, you know, like, is it, you know, we need to actually make it profitable before you can recover, right? Like that's the, yeah.
And it's really, I mean, it depends on the type of businesses. Is there an external factor? Maybe you did not anticipate that the sales would be so small. Maybe you thought that it would make more money each month, and then it's been over a year, 2 years, you're carrying that. So
no, it's a good point. And then I guess kind of a question for the three of you, but what would you say are the biggest reasons that businesses don't succeed? I know we've kind of talked about some of the, you know, the mentoring or the advisory network and whatnot. But what are the biggest reasons that you see where businesses don't yet work out?
I think I shared a little bit about it earlier. Like, I really think it depends in the market that they're entering into, and that research and that foundational like business prop. Scaling too quickly and making some investments. We've seen a lot of larger organizations in the last year in particular really suffer with this growth at all costs mindset. And that is, you know, more so in the more traditional kind of tech environments that we sort of straddle as well. But being meticulous about spend, we're seeing organizations now have to reel back and be really thoughtful around where they're making investments. It was a wacky market in terms of talent and competition and the investment community, et cetera. So we're seeing some of those ripples impacted now. And to your point, some of the stats that you shared at the beginning around leadership, there are phenomenal entrepreneurial leaders that are building businesses and supporting team members and thinking about the full experience of building their business. And then there's also a lot of ego and a lot of people making calls potentially for the wrong reasons. And we see some of that, and that fizzles out businesses when there's no substance behind what they might be sharing or leveraging for their growth. So a couple of areas there, but I don't think there's one direct line why businesses fail. Because obviously if we knew that, then people might avoid it.
Yeah. What are the biggest risk factors, I guess?
Yeah.
And yeah, I think you've touched on a few there. Like that's good. Yeah. Like on even just like the ego side of things, or even just looking at not the wholesome picture of the experience for everyone on the team, and the competitive analysis, which is sometimes ignored. Yeah, those are all really good points. Yeah. And Jess, Valerie, do you have any other big points on that?
I think, you know, the founder is very important, but on the expense side, the two main expenses for most businesses are COGS and payroll. So like kind of what Kayla said about growth over anything else, like sometimes I see people hiring too quickly and they don't even understand like what value these people are adding, and payroll is really expensive, right? So you need to make sure that these people are actually generating sufficient revenue for you. And, you know, I also see some business owners, they don't understand their cost of goods sold, or like how much things are actually costing them, so that they can charge the appropriate price. So I don't know, I see this in the restaurant industry a lot just because there's so many elements to a dish and the labor and all of that, but it's important to at least cost out, you know, your main dishes so you know you're like charging the appropriate amount out, right?
Yep. No, that makes sense. Yeah, trying to price it out, and that's, I guess, chatting with your accountant or just trying to figure it out. Like, it's a little bit of trial and error on what you should be charging, right? We've got 2 questions that came in, but maybe Valerie, I'll let you answer, and then we can go through the questions after.
Sure. I was just actually going to echo what Kayla said, because I feel like having a good team is something so important, because you cannot be good at everything, right? So you can be really diligent, want to learn, but ultimately everybody has their own set of skills. So often I see that people coming to see me, they're wearing all different hats, right?
Right.
So, and maybe it's cost effective in a way, but probably not good in the end, because if it's not your expertise, then how can you accomplish? And it can be either HR, accounting, strategy. Like, there are a lot of skills that are proper to somebody, I think.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the small business owners struggle because it's like, well, in order to be profitable, I can't hire an external like consultant to help with this. I have to like learn it, but then I can't get to the stage where I can afford them, you know, and so it's tough. But I guess what you're saying is that there are some things that if you clearly don't know certain things, like, you absolutely have to hire someone else who's going to know how to do it, because that's going to be a game changer. That's going to be the thing that's going to make you kind of tank if you break some really important rules, right? Yeah. Okay, we've got 3 questions. These questions are just coming in here. I think, Valerie, you might be good on this one, but anybody can chime in. But there's the, do you see more failures with sole proprietorship or incorporated firms?
So whether you're incorporated or not, I feel like I see more repeaters, if I can say, with the sole proprietorships. So that's kind of my take on it. Often somebody who's a sole prop, what I see will be a specific trade, or maybe you're doing, the example that comes to mind is like landscaping or something super seasonal, or this is just one example, but there's a multiple of examples for a sole prop. And I feel like those ones, they have a hard time just because it's so specific of a season, and so specific about limited income, right? So I would have tendency to say sole prop.
Yeah. Okay. And any thoughts, Kayla, Jess, on that?
No, just interested. I'm learning a lot.
Yeah. I'd say, just from my own experience, like, I think once someone has done a business, they, like, once they kind of like have grown a business, it's probably more incorporated, like, by the time it gets to maturity. And if they're starting a second business, then they're definitely going to have it incorporated. Like, it's going to be within their corporation instead of a sole prop. So I'm sure that kind of skews results as well, because like experienced business owners will eventually likely have 1 to multiple corporations. Whereas if you're going to have just one business that's like a, you know, a contracting business or like a barbershop or something, like, you might be a sole prop. So that could skew things too. Another question that came in, I don't know if this is again for you, Valerie, but anyone can chime in. Is it possible for an acquisition of a bankrupt business with the sole purpose of reviving it and making it profitable? Ooh, this is interesting.
Sure. Like, you could decide to buy some restaurant equipment. You could negotiate with the landlord to have a lease agreement for that specific premise, and just build it back up, and you're not carrying all that debts because it's erased with the bankruptcy. So that's definitely an option. There are some rules that need to be followed in order to achieve that, but it's doable.
I guess the model has to be significantly different than the previous one who didn't work, right? Like it's like you're not just going to do the exact same type of restaurant with the exact same marketing and the exact same, like, you know, everything. Like you should probably change things up if you're going to try a different go at it, right? Like,
I agree with you, Eric.
And then maybe a clarifying question here was, because we kind of talked about the jack of all trades. So the question is, you know, so being a jack of all trades, is that good or bad? I.e. having knowledge of each part of the business. So I think that's worth clarifying.
For me, it's good. It's a good thing. But in the end, you need to recognize your limits too. And that's sometimes not so easy to do. But so having the knowledge and being able to understand every aspect of your business is important. But then are you going to be the one actually doing the job or doing that specific thing? That's maybe where I see the limit. Maybe Jess or Kayla has something to, or Eric has something to add, but that would kind of be my take on it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would say I would recommend having a comfortable awareness of every single part of your business. Like you don't want one entire segment of your organization to be something that you don't understand, you're not comfortable approaching, et cetera. And we see that, you know, with finance, for example, some entrepreneurs deciding to hire somebody dedicated to not even necessarily accounting, but overall financial management, and doing no homework to even start speaking that language a little bit and get more comfortable in that space. And that's a huge vulnerability that, you know, there's so much that could potentially go wrong there. I host a podcast, the Startup Women podcast. I ask this all the time that, you know, what do you think in terms of hiring contractors or leveraging more niche subject matter expertise and bringing it to your organization? Is that beneficial? And I would say it's split very much down the middle of some founders saying you need to be in every single part of your business, you need to learn, you need to be embedded, and others saying contract everything you don't want to do and make sure that you're focusing on like your superpower and what you master and what's going to make you the most efficient founder as possible. So I think it's a bit of an opinion in the community that I've sort of pulled in the past. But personally, like I run a nonprofit and I know every single part of the business. The one thing I can't do is edit the podcast, but I know notionally, okay, we use this software. You know, this is the timeline that we generally need to produce it. I still understand the process. But in the event something happened and, you know, I was the only person with electricity and I needed to edit the podcast, I'm sure I could MacGyver something through.
And Jess, did you have any thoughts?
I don't know. I just thought the points that you guys said about being aware of your weaknesses and what you actually can't execute on is really important, right? Like it's, you know, it's like, it's one thing to be aware of every part of your business, but another thing to be like, okay, I actually want this part done well. And I know that I'm not trained on how to do it. And like, I kind of know the gist of how to do it if I had to, but I would prefer to outsource it so that it's actually done professionally and done well.
Right. Yeah. And it sounds like what you're all saying is like, you need to know enough to be dangerous and enough to like poke holes in the consultant's work, you know, like to say like, no, I don't think that's done right. You know, like that's, you just need to know, I guess, that level of knowledge, it sounds like, you know, that's cool. Okay. Yeah, cool. Okay. Well, we got a bunch of questions in. That's great. Let's see, what do we have here? Maybe kind of on network and influence. I think that one thing that that's come to my perspective, I guess, is that regardless of your business, if you have a good, vast, and deep network of people that you've gathered, you know, some influence and just network of other people, it doesn't matter your business idea, but you know, you'll have those advisors that can help you, right? So how important have you found like that network of like, whether that's informal, like networking events, like are those a big, not say a waste of time, but like I think there's an infinite amount of networking events that you could go to, and to build your network is kind of something that people say, right? But like, how important is it actually for new business owners, and is it detrimental to starting your business, like if you don't build your network, right?
I can jump in first on that. I think everyone is really struggling with this right now because we're going from pandemic where we had very few networking opportunities, or they were sort of these rigid online one-on-one brain date kind of modalities that don't feel as authentic as it is just to like sit down and have a coffee with somebody. And knowing where that boundary is of, as a new founder, how much time do I need to be spending on my business versus networking with entrepreneurs and getting myself into that whole community. There's not like a perfect science that it needs to be a sprinkle of this, sprinkle of that. I think being thoughtful around the types of networks that are really going to be beneficial towards you. Like, is your mental health the biggest thing that is struggling right now? You just need to find people in the community who understand how challenging it is to be a business owner. Is that where you want to focus right now? Are you actually looking for talent and wanting to market in spaces where you might be able to find your next hire? Are you looking for trade shows or trying to understand the technologies and actually looking for maybe a network of suppliers that might be able to help you? If you hone in on what you're trying to solve and create roadmaps, and it's going to go through seasons, right? The same network that you tap into Q1 of 2022 might be totally different than Q4, depending on where your business is at. And that's okay. But if you're constantly spreading yourself across so many different thin networking spaces, you might come out of it feeling a bit of a shallow sense of community that you've said hello to thousands of people versus having a deep conversation with maybe 100 over a year. That could sort of segment the opportunities. But it's particularly challenging now that we're like rebuilding this networking muscle, because I'm like, man, I'm rusty going to these events. Can't even talk to people anymore. And the emotional exhaustion that also comes from putting yourself out there in person again. So not an easy formula, but being intentional about who you're trying to find, I think would be my recommendation.
Yeah, it sounds like so what you're saying is like have a purpose in mind, but obviously not, super selfish kind of perspective, but like kind of like knowing like, what are you trying to do with your networking, right? Like, it's not just kind of accepting every single networking event. It's about knowing what is it that you actually need in the next several months or year for the business, and then kind of targeting that, right?
And recognizing the seasonality of it, right? You might just be like inspiration might be the focus of Q1. Like, you just need to see some really cool businesses in action. But giving yourself that permission to change through seasons has been advice that we've been giving founders in our community.
That's great. Cool. And Jess, Valerie, have you seen kind of like the lack of network being a factor in business failures at all?
Actually, I had a question for Kayla, kind of around what you said. So what do you think about small business owners that basically just like pay their group of advisors, right? Like, they pay for a lawyer, they pay for an accountant, whoever that they need advice from, or a business coach, like, so then that way they don't need to go out and meet like so many people and kind of ask for advice for free.
Yeah, and I guess I almost see it being like, what is an advisor? Is an advisor actually a team member or somebody who is doing something concretely for your business, like a lawyer or an accountant, et cetera? Like, I almost see that more as your team versus a general person that you might meet who's in a similar industry to you, that you're like, how did you solve this problem? Like, how are we all looking at talent right now? There's so much that different industries are suffering with. Just being in those spaces saying, how are you recruiting? How are you managing compensation? How are you doing this? Versus the actual like HR consultant you might be bringing in to find that next hire. But it is challenging with advisory support in general and finding, formal mentorship programs. You could pay for all of that. Or you could find, more cost-effective ways. There's lots of choices in that whole process, but I see those as almost two different advisory or like structured relationships that you might have.
That's a good point. And then Valerie, have you seen any kind of like the impact of someone who has like basically zero network? Like, is the network kind of a factor for you when you see, I guess, files? Like, is it factor in any way?
Well, I feel like people, as they're coming towards the understanding that maybe their business is not viable, it's a lot of energy, and they're putting a lot of things aside, right? Either it's because they're cutting down on staff, or maybe because they're trying to put their energy just on doing the job. So I feel like all the networking is probably already set aside, just because it's, like Kayla said, it's a lot of emotional energy to put to words. So I'm not ready to say that it's a factor. But I just think that in the end, it's just, there's no more energy to put towards that.
Mm-hmm. No, that's a good point. Maybe now's a good time to put in a poll. We've got a poll that we can put out, make sure everyone's awake here. Give me 1 second. Let's see if I can launch it here. So it'll give you a few seconds to put it in. So the question for everyone is, have you had business ideas that didn't work? So I guess it's a simple yes or no. It's never, maybe it's not a clear answer always on whether it worked or not. But if you could answer, that'd be cool. That'd be fun. Oh, still got them coming in. Ooh. All right. Oh, geez. Okay, cool. Well, we've got the results here. We're gonna, yeah, I'll end the poll here. So, yeah, basically we've got. Let me just actually I can share the results. So we've got 88% of people have said that yes, they've had a business idea that didn't work. So, yeah, hopefully that also gives you confidence that you're not the only one. That this happens all the time, and that just because, let's say you go through and talk to Valerie through Ginsberg Gingras as a bankruptcy trustee, doesn't mean that it's not going to work the next time, right? And I'm sure Kayla and Jess, you've seen the same thing of like the first idea doesn't always work, right? Yeah. Any thoughts on that?
That's entrepreneurship. Like it's not naturally going to be an obvious straight shot. Like it's naturally iterative, and it's important to not hold on for dear life to every idea that you have, because that's not going to serve you as well. You need to be able to let go of the ideas that are bad.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of what's tough too, is that like you as an entrepreneur, you're kind of like deep into like, this is my idea. I'm going to persevere. I'm going to keep going at this. But at some point, you also have to admit that, okay, it's not a good idea anymore. Let's move on to a better idea, you know, or whatnot. And that must be, yeah, that's a tough time. Yeah. We've got a couple more questions that came in. We've got so many questions coming in here. So here we've got a question for maybe the three of you. Should you patent your idea before setting up your business, or vice versa? So setting up the business and then patent the idea. Yeah, any thoughts?
IP is hard in Canada is my answer to that, and very time consuming and a long process. We see a lot of founders struggling with keeping their IP in Canada versus going to a different country like the US, where that process might be a little bit faster. So protecting your business, yes, is very important, but this whole process is it's not quick, depending as well on the industry you're working in, the type of idea or product that you're developing. So it's a lengthy process, so it's setting up your business around it. I don't want to say an exclusive answer to that question, but give yourself some time.
Jess, Valerie, should we patent our ideas before starting the business, or should you start the business and then patent the idea? Yeah, I mean, oh, so were you going to say something, Valerie?
No, I don't.
Okay.
I don't work really in that
that
section, let's say. So
yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's probably a very niche thing as well, for like if someone's going through bankruptcy, but there's intellectual property, and then it's like, can you even sell this intellectual property? Is there a fair market value? And
yeah, how does that work?
You know, gee.
We've sold, sold, but we rarely see that. So, but it happens.
And one of the things that stuck with me before about intellectual property as well is that, like, you know, ideas in a way are cheap, and it's execution that matters. You know, like you might get some ideas from some people kind of thing, but it's whoever is actually executing, that's the tough work, you know. Like, so there's obviously intellectual property rights in Canada and throughout the world for a reason, because there's certain, you know, medical patents and all of that. But I think from what I've seen, like, I think that some people overvalue intellectual property when they're starting a business. They like don't even want to share their idea with an advisor or their lawyer or anybody else, because they think someone's going to steal my idea and make all this money off of me. And it's like, you know, you need to put yourself out there. And realistically, if you, I mean, anyway, talk to a lawyer about intellectual property. But from some of my experience as well, you can apply for trademark or a patent, and then you don't have to have it secured before you actually start to use it, right? Like you just register, and then you'll actually hear back in months or a year or whatever, you know, but like, it doesn't mean you have to wait for that to finalize before you actually start using your ideas. Yeah. So, all right, so we'll take that one off. We've got a couple more questions here. So this is kind of a high level question, but what are your, oh, we might have lost Valerie here for a second. Here we go. What are the key steps of setting up your business in Canada and securing funding? So that's very kind of high level. It sounds like it's someone who's just starting a whole new business, doesn't have funding, kind of what should they look at next?
We actually have a tool. I'm literally just finding the URL called the Business Owner's Toolbox. And this is like foundational building blocks of what to explore when you're first starting your business. This is not advice per se. These are, you know, what's the difference between federal and provincial incorporation? How do you build a website? What different platforms can you consider? And there's lots of different business models, like what's a B Corp? What's the difference between a nonprofit or a charity? So lots of foundational information in there. It's totally free. That's where I would recommend starting.
Perfect. Okay. Yeah, I just shared the link in the chat, so hopefully everyone has that. That's great. Any other thoughts from Valerie, Jess, on that, starting a business, kind of like where to get funding, how to get set up?
I guess to start, if it's just a simple business, I see a lot of people just starting as a sole proprietor. Then that way they don't need to incorporate, like they basically just include all that like income and expenses in their personal tax return. So that's usually the easiest way if it's just something simple. People usually decide to incorporate if they want to kind of separate themselves for liability purposes. I guess that's like a more formal way of setting up your business, but yeah, I would say the hardest step is just to get started and just to learn what works during your first year.
Cool, good, okay. And then one more question. We've got, how do you navigate identifying the right business model for you, right? So in kind of in the context of why businesses fail, right? Like how do you navigate, you know, what is the right model for you?
I think building an awareness of like what types of business models are available. Like, do you mean like in terms of actual business structures or different type of business model? Actually, maybe I should clarify that.
Yeah, I mean, they said specifically business model. So, I mean, it's a different kind of like way of doing business or different kind of like, because there's business plans, I guess, but model would be kind of different industries and different, yeah.
Yeah, I think like exploring what is out there. Again, in Business Owner's Toolbox, we have a number of different resources on that as well. And one thing that we're seeing a huge shift in is, you know, outside of nonprofit and social enterprises, a lot of for-profit social enterprises that are being built, and like reimagining what it actually looks like to build businesses that are doing good while also being profitable and for profit versus a nonprofit structure.
Right.
So all this to say, there's some shifts.
That's interesting too. Yeah, I've heard about those B corporations and yeah, that's really cool stuff. Okay, yeah, social enterprises. Okay, cool. So we got that one answered. So I don't think we have any more questions there, but I did want to ask Jess on systems and tech stack. I know oftentimes you work with different software and making sure the business owners have the right tech stack on, you know, their back end, right? So how important is that right technology? And have you seen kind of issues happen because they had the wrong tech stack?
Yeah, well, having the right tech stack, especially in the cloud space, really helps, you know, owners get more relevant information quicker. So it just helps everything. It's just like way easier to look things up. It's way easier to reconcile. And usually if you get the financials quicker, then you can make decisions on that sooner. So issues that I've seen is like if someone is using kind of a software that's too simple. So for not-for-profits, a lot of times they need to track different projects, or in construction, they need to track like the profitability of each project. And if it's a software that's too simple that can't let you like tag those different revenue and expense sources, then you can't get the information you need. And then people are spending, you know, so much time just redoing everything manually. And something else I see is, you know, when there's companies that have like really large amounts of data, like where you need to input invoices, I find they're spending a lot of money on accounting staff because they're entering everything manually and then like checking the errors. But if you have a good tech stack that can, you know, read the information, sync everything, and then you don't need to do all that extra work, you actually save a lot of money on payroll.
Yeah, I mean, earlier we talked about how administration and the finance side was like one of the things that caused a lot of the actual issues in the long term, right? And then, so it sounds like a lot of the tech stack and the systems essentially make it easier so that you can actually remain compliant, right? So that's kind of like a good way to kind of avoid the big challenges, is that if you can make the thing that's annoying and hugely important easier to do, you've got a better chance of success, right? No, that's great. We have another poll that I wanted to make sure to put out today. So give me 1 second. I'll see if I can put it out here. We've got, all right, well, this one's about cash flow. Let me launch this one. So how concerned are you right now about cash flow? We've talked a little bit about it earlier, about, you know, kind of the difference between building a profitable business model, concentrating on cash flow, and basically how cash flow can impact kind of some risks yeah, so I think it'd be good to kind of get a feel for things from everyone in this room of how important cash flow is to you right now. So we'll let a few more seconds in here. We're getting a couple answers. Seem to keep flowing in. Good. Good. Okay, maybe just a little longer. All right, great. Well, it seems pretty split. This is good. So we've got, here, I'll end the poll here. So I'll share these results here. So it looks like, thankfully, no one is very concerned, which is great. And no one is not very concerned. So that seems about right. So yeah, 40% are pretty concerned, 40% are moderately concerned, and only 20% are a little concerned. So, okay, good. No, this is interesting to see and see kind of where everyone's at. Sometimes people approach even us and they're like, look, I don't even know what to do. I don't even know where to begin, and kind of a state of chaos. And so it's kind of good to know kind of where people are in that. Oh, we got another question that just came in. Let's see here. So when trying to start a business, how do you determine the fine line between taking sufficient time to start sales versus taking too long to start? Is there a good indicator of taking too long? Ooh. Who wants to chime in on that one?
These are good questions. Yeah, well, I guess cash runway, how long can you actually sustain not selling? That being a major indicator. That would be my answer.
Yeah, I guess it's about financing. Like, do you have a runway, right?
Yeah.
Like, if you have loads of investors lining up and huge potential, then maybe revenue isn't as important, right?
Yeah, I think it really depends on the industry, right? Because there's a lot of kind of tech companies that don't make money for years, but they have a lot of investors. But I think for the typical small business owner, like getting the sales in, the sooner the better. And then that way you know that your services work, or like people are actually wanting to use your services or wanting to use your product. And just get it in as soon as you can.
Valerie, you're going to say get some cash in right away to avoid a conversation with you.
Yeah, definitely. And there's always kind of a fine line between putting also your personal money in your business, right?
Right, yeah.
So at some point, maybe it's normal at the beginning, but you need to transition where the business needs to be providing, and not you putting all your personal money into the business to make it viable.
That's a good point. Like, when do you stop putting like good money after bad, right? Like, it's a, you know, an extra 10 grand here, an extra 10 grand there, and then it just adds up, right? No, it's a good point. Cool. Okay, so we've got that question answered. Let's see, what else do we have here that we wanted to kind of get through? I mean, yeah, so we're not lawyers here, but are there any kind of like quick wins on the legal challenges or anything that, like, I know sometimes it's iffy to talk about law stuff, and especially if we're not lawyers, that's kind of also the good perspective of like, you know, what is it that a non-lawyer should be actually careful about when starting their business, right? Like, what are the biggest risks that you've seen related to legal?
So my take on this is just make sure that you understand personally what you're getting into, right? Because in the scenario where you're incorporated, where is that line? You're liable for unpaid HST. Are you liable for the lease agreement that you sign under your business's name? So it's not because you're incorporated that automatically you're protected. So there could be definitely some things that need to be looked at, and just make sure that you understand how personally you're liable, because in the end, and maybe that's because I'm on the bad side of it in a way, but when it comes down to it, I mean, if you're putting your house at risk, did you even understand that when you started your business, that potentially your house could be at risk if the business fails? So those are just the things. When things are going well, that's the time to make sure that all your ducks are in a row, basically.
Good point. And then, so we've got about 2 minutes left here. With time's flying by, which is great. So many questions. We got the polls being answered by everyone, which is great. Do any of the three of you have any kind of thoughts or things that you really wanted to talk about today that you haven't, that you feel like people should know about?
I think my biggest sort of comment is like, there's no perfect, absolute, foolproof way to build a business. If there was, then we would have perfectly scaled businesses that were thriving consistently, and we wouldn't see businesses fail. So it's an art, a science. It's experimental. It's a little messy, and so just give yourself the protections that you need to make sure you're doing it properly, and be aware of all of these things that we've chatted about, but be gentle on yourself that you can't be an expert in every single part of building a business. It's just not possible.
Good point. And Jess, Valerie, any final thoughts?
Make sure you meet with a bookkeeper or your accountant regularly.
I'll echo that too.
Yeah.
Me too.
Well, I'm glad we all agree. That's good. Okay, well, this is great. Yeah. So, I mean, this whole session is recorded. So if you're watching it now, you've probably watched the recording, or you can watch the recording later. We're also going to summarize things afterwards. We like to put a little blog post that explains kind of what we talked about. And yeah, join us on one of our next Fireside Chat Webinar series. So we've got one coming up. I think our next one's in January, just to skip over the holidays. And I appreciate Kayla, Jess, and Valerie to make some time in your busy schedules. I think there's been so much insight shared today. I'm so glad it's recorded, because we had so many questions come in, and people are probably going to have some questions later. Is it okay if I share some of your contact info with the recording later, just so that people could reach out to you should they have questions? Does that make sense?
Please do.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Valerie. Jess, Kayla. Awesome. Okay. Perfect. Thanks, Kayla. I'll share that afterwards. All right. Well, thanks again, and have a good rest of the day, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.